Madam President, I rise today in support of SRES 377, which is a resolution to enforce a subpoena of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, which I chair. I'll be joined shortly by my colleague, Senator Claire McCaskill of Missouri, who is the ranking Democrat on the subcommittee and who I've worked with as a partner on this issue over the past year. This is a subpoena that we issued to a group called Backpage, backpage.com. This resolution is intended to enforce that subpoena. Backpage and its Chief Executive Officer, Carl Ferrer, have not been willing to cooperate with the committee, and unfortunately, we're at the point where we have to seek the enforcement of our subpoena. For nearly a year now, Senator McCaskill and I have conducted a bipartisan investigation into the scourge of human trafficking on the internet, with a focus on sex trafficking involving children. In the past 5 years, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children reported an over 800% increase in reports of suspected child sex trafficking, an increase the organization has found to be, and I quote, directly correlated to the increased use of the internet to sell children for sex. They testified before our subcommittee about this. They're the experts. They see this huge increase being related to the internet. In other words, the destructive crime of sex slavery has moved from the street corner to the smartphone. An adult can now shop for underage trafficking victims from their computer screen. And sex traffickers are well aware that sex advertising sites like Backpage.com, the biggest one by far, offer them a quick and easy-to-use marketplace to sell children and coerced adults. Here's how the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children spells it out, describing this growing problem at a hearing I chaired last year. Online classified ads, such as Backpage.com, they say, allow sex traffickers to remain anonymous, test out new markets, attempt to evade public or law enforcement detection, and easily locate customers to consummate their sale of children for sex. Online sex trafficking also enables traffickers to easily update an existing ad with a new location and quickly move the child to another geographic location where there are more customers seeking to purchase a child for rape or sexual abuse. This is from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. As co-chair of the Senate Caucus to End Human Trafficking, I've spent many hours with those dedicated to fighting this crime and those who are victimized by it. For victims, the toll of sex trafficking is measured in stolen childhoods, in painful trauma. For traffickers, it's measured in dollars, often a lot of dollars. It's a problem that I believe should command more attention around our country and certainly here in the United States Congress. The aim of our investigation is very straightforward. We want to understand how lawmakers, law enforcement, and even private businesses can more effectively combat this serious crime that thrives on the online black market. Traffickers have found refuge and new customers through websites that specialize in advertising, quote, ordinary prostitution and lawful escort services. Again, this business called Backpage.com is the market leader in that industry, with annual revenues in excess of $130 million last year. Backpage has a special niche. According to one industry analyst, in 2013, 8 out of every $10 spent on online commercial sex advertising in the United States goes to Backpage.com. The public record indicates that Backpage sits at the center of the online black market for sex trafficking. Again, the National Center has reported that of the suspected child trafficking reports it receives from the public, 71% involve Backpage. Again, they have said that of the suspected child trafficking reports they receive from the public, and they have a 1-800 number, they get reports from the public, 71% involve Backpage.com. According to a leading anti-trafficking organization called Shared Hope International, and I quote, service providers working with child sex trafficking victims have reported that between 80% and 100% of their clients have been bought and sold on Backpage.com. In fact, this organization has documented more than 400 cases in 47 states of children being sex trafficked on Backpage.com. Despite all this, Backpage executives said they're committed to combating sex trafficking. The company claims that its internal procedures for reviewing and screening advertisements lead the industry. That claim led us to ask a very simple question. What are those industry-leading procedures? If they're so effective in the fight against human trafficking, Congress and other lawmakers ought to know about them. That's why Senator McCaskill and I asked Backpage for documents about their ad screening practices, a process Backpage calls, quote, moderation, end quote. We also asked for other information about their business practices. Fair questions, targeted questions, relevant questions. The company has refused to answer them, refused to cooperate. We then took the next step and issued a subpoena to Backpage's CEO, Carl Ferrer, requiring him to produce documents about Backpage's moderation practices, efforts to combat human trafficking, and financial information. The company essentially told us no. Wrapping itself in a frivolous First Amendment argument, Backpage refuses to produce documents about its business practices and has told us that the company refuses to even look for documents. Not just that they don't have the documents, but they refuse to even look for them. A clear sign of willful contempt for the Senate's process. And that's why we're here today on the floor. Senator McCaskill and I gave Backpage every opportunity to cooperate in good faith with our investigation. We carefully considered its objections to the subpoena. We actually issued a 19-page opinion, thoughtfully overruling their objections and directing Backpage to comply. They continued to stonewall. But in the meantime, our investigation has not stopped. Our investigators and lawyers have found a number of third parties and other witnesses who had information about Backpage's practices and procedures. Along the way, we discovered that from 2010 to 2012, Backpage outsourced much of its screening, and again, this moderation, meaning looking at these ads coming in, the screening and moderation they outsourced to others, including to workers in India. We obtained emails from the California company that managed those India-based moderators, including emails with Backpage's CEO and other executives. These emails are deeply troubling. Our investigation showed that Backpage edited advertisements before posting them by removing certain words, certain phrases, certain images. For instance, they might remove a word or image that makes it clear that the sexual services that are being offered for money. And then they might post this sanitized version of an ad. While this editing changes nothing about the underlying transaction, it tends to conceal the evidence of illegality. In other words, Backpage's editing procedures, far from being an effective anti-trafficking measure, served to sanitize the ads of illegal content to the outside viewer. We still don't know the full extent of Backpage's editing practices, how much of the illegal conduct, or even the fact that they were selling minors online, was being concealed. Why? Because Backpage won't tell us. Then there's this email. It tells the moderators what to do if they have doubts about whether a girl advertised on Backpage is underage. I want to quote from this email. It says, "If in doubt about underage, the process should for now be to accept the ad. However, if you find anything that you feel is underage and is more than just suspicious, you can delete the ad. Only delete if you really very sure person is underage." To be clear, we didn't get this information from Backpage itself because it refuses to provide it. This came from the contractor. Backpage claims emails like this are protected by the First Amendment, which is not accurate. In November, Senator McCaskill and I released a bipartisan staff report about our investigation. We held a hearing to consider what to do about Backpage's noncompliance. I encourage members to take a look at this staff report. It's online. You can find it. By the way, despite being under a subpoena, Backpage's CEO refused to show up for that hearing that we held. Shortly before the hearing date, they simply informed us that he wasn't going to show up. This is something Senator McCaskill and I will continue to focus on. But others did show up for our hearing. We heard testimony from law enforcement, prosecutors. We heard testimony from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, confirming what we had come to suspect. Backpage is not really an ally in the fight against human trafficking, they said. It profits from it. The General Counsel of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children told us that it had dozens of meetings with Backpage about improving the company's anti-trafficking measures. But those meetings ended because the National Center concluded that Backpage was, and I quote, not engaging in good faith efforts to deter the selling and buying of children for sex on its website. The National Center told us, and again I quote, despite Backpage's assertions, it was adopting and publicizing only carefully selected sound practices while resisting recommended substantive measures that would protect more children from being sold for sex on Backpage.com. For example, the National Center noted that Backpage did not hash its photos, a very low-cost technique for comparing digital images that could help identify missing children. The National Center also noted that Backpage has more stringent rules to post an ad to sell a pet, a motorcycle, or a boat than it does to sell a person. A user is required to submit a verified phone number for selling a hamster, but not when placing ads that could involve the sale of a child for sex. Think about that. The human toll of all this is staggering. It's hard to overstate the traumatic effect of a minor being advertised on a daily basis on a site like Backpage.com. In a recent lawsuit brought against Backpage in Boston, the plaintiff was a 15-year-old girl who had been raped over 1,000 times as a result of being advertised on Backpage.com. 1,000 times. In the course of our investigation, we also heard some similarly heart-wrenching stories. For example, Backpage receives reports from families pleading with it to take down ads of their children. Here's one such email that was sent to Backpage that the National Center shared with us. This is an email, remember, from a parent about a child being sent to Backpage. And it said this: your website has ads featuring our 16-year-old daughter posing as an escort. She is being pimped out by her old boyfriend, and she is underage. I have emailed the ad multiple times using your website, but I've gotten no response. For God's sake, she's only 16. Stuff like this shouldn't be allowed to happen. End quote. This is from a parent pleading. Even after receiving such reports, the National Center tells us Backpage often does not remove the ad. Instead, the ad remains live on the website, which allows the abuse of that child to continue. Imagine as a parent, or a grandparent, or an aunt or uncle, or a brother or a sister, feeling helpless in the face of Backpage, not even being willing to take down an ad of a family member. You see, it's sometimes hard to square Backpage's public statements about its business practices with the reality on the ground. For example, the National Center recently was searching for a child who went missing, and by the way, is still missing, and found that she appeared in a sex advertisement on Backpage. Sadly, that's pretty common. What made this case even more incredible was a Backpage ad actually contained a missing child poster of that same child. So the ad, advertising sex, actually used the missing child poster of that child. That poster had the child's real name on it, real age, real picture, and the date that she went missing. The other pictures in the ad included topless photos. We'd certainly like to know what supposedly market-leading screening and moderation procedures missed that one. And that, Madam President, is exactly why we need the documents that we have asked for from Backpage, documents that we have subpoenaed from Backpage. Without them, we can't really evaluate how sex trafficking has proliferated in these online marketplaces. But we can't really evaluate how Congress can do a better job fighting against this crime. We can't really help the many prosecutors at the local level who are trying to stop this practice, or the attorneys general around the United States of America who are trying to stop this practice. We can't really help to stop this from happening. To be clear, our purpose is absolutely not to shut down any particular company or to deter protected advertising for lawful services. This is not an attempt to shut down something that is lawful on the internet. It's an attempt to stop something that's unlawful. Nor are we even looking for information about individual advertisers. In fact, Senator McCaskill and I have made clear that Backpage should redact any documents they send us any of the personally identifying information about its users. We don't need that. That's not what we're about. What we are interested in is facts that will enable smart legislation on a critical issue of public concern. We hope our investigation will help to combat this process directly, but also will help to generate legislation here in the United States Congress. This civil contempt resolution before us today, SRES 377, will enable us to get those facts. It was reported out of the full committee unanimously. And I want to thank Senator Ron Johnson, the chairman of the committee, and Senator Tom Carper, the ranking member of the committee, and all of our colleagues on the committee for their unwavering support of this investigation. This will be the first time in more than 20 years that the Senate has had to enforce a subpoena in court. I can't think of a time when it's been more justified. To my colleagues who are wondering about this, again, I hope they'll look at our report and see why it's so important that we move forward with enforcing this subpoena. The Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations has a long history of investigating crime that infiltrates interstate commerce and affects our nation's health and safety. In our era, the crime of human trafficking has become a scourge. And Congress needs to know everything it can to be able to better fight it. No investigation of that subject could omit Backpage.com. Again, as we've heard from these outside groups, the vast majority of this sex trafficking is going online through this very site. The National Association of Attorneys General has described Backpage as a hub of human trafficking, especially the trafficking of minors. That's the attorney generals around the country. This is an issue that affects, unfortunately, all of our communities. It knows no zip code. Before I yield the floor, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter a number of statements in support in the record from the nation's leading anti-trafficking organizations, including the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Mr. President, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter these statements of record.
Without objection.
And Mr. President, I urge my colleagues to vote yes on this resolution and vindicate the authority of Congress to obtain information necessary for sound legislation to protect the most vulnerable among us. Mr. President, we're going to hear shortly from Senator Claire McCaskill, who has been a partner of mine in this effort from the beginning. This investigation has taken about a year. We've done it thoughtfully and carefully. And again, I want to express my gratitude to her for her support of the legislation. We wanted to wait until she was back here in Congress. She was home taking care of some important health matters in order to take up this vote today. I know that she will express her own strongly held views on this, but I just want to say that I hope all of my colleagues, Republican and Democrat alike, will look at this issue and realize that this is an opportunity for us to go on record supporting an investigation that can lead to legislation that can actually help to protect those most vulnerable among us. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.